I'll get started. I had planned to talk after Britt and Martin, and to open by saying that they have been talking about new news, and I'll be coming to you with old news, and I am. So I have been invited here to talk as a keeper of culture, and my name is Johanna Berg. So it should not be read as a reply to the query from the past. I work for the Swedish National Archives at a unit called DigiSam. It's been initiated by the government here to support digital development in cultural heritage institutions. And we have a lot to work on. I'm not a tech person myself. So it's been really inspiring to take part of all the stuff that you've been presenting here these last days. But I'm approaching this from kind of another angle. And at least if you're from Gothenburg, I hope you recognize this place. It's I think it's the main building of the Gothenburg University. So who does own the past, the history, and all the memories? My reply to that would be that it belongs to all of us, that all heritage and all culture is for all people in the whole world, and all meaning all, and whole meaning whole. And we have been working to enforce this message, as this has longer been a dominant perspective on the issue. You see, you recognize this guy maybe, it's George Orwell, and the quote is from his famous novel 1984, who controls the past, controls the future, who controls the present, controls the past. And the quote goes on with something like, it's easy, you just have to conquer your own memory over and over again and tell yourself that what is true today has been true always and will be true always. And you see also in the image he's talking through the one and only BBC radio channel. This is 1940, I think, in a time when it was easier to control the media channels of information. Now, as you know better than me, there are other ways to control and supervise what people are saying, but the channels are not as monopolized as they used to be. So we're in an era when people can tell stories and share facts from multiple sources, and in a good way collaboratively build on knowledge together, and maybe in a more pessimistic scenario take control over us all in new ways. But we're working, as I said, for all people to be able to take part in the history building. Of course, people have always lived their ordinary lives, but most of the time it has not been recognized as part of history. So big history has taken the small people's lives and turned it into something else. Something maybe shiny and impressive and overly homogeneous and often nationalistic, something that excludes most of us from recognition. And also this is the history of war, as always, like, you know, written by the conqueror. So that's the single history. This is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the Nigerian writer, who has warned us all from the trap of the single story. The single story creates stereotypes, she says, and the problem with them is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And even this quote goes on a bit further on how the storytelling and the history can deprive people from their dignity and their past, but also the power in the story and the history telling in giving back that dignity and mend what has been broken by history. So that's a big task for all of us. So if we turn our backs to the big history, we get something more peaceful, more complex, more kaleidoscopic, maybe more human, something that we can recognize and meet the people of history face to face. It gets a bit messy though, and less maybe impressive and hegemonic, but easier to relate to, and it makes it more. It opens new ways for us to recognize ourselves in the people who came here before us. So the history of peace is more. It presents itself from more angles, with shifting perspectives, many voices wanting to speak, and hopefully many ears ready to listen to the various histories. And I want to give you a few examples of what that might mean. You may recognize this picture. It's been an iconic image of the celebration in the United States when they finally reached Peace Day in 1945. In Europe, we usually celebrate the end of World War II during spring 1945, as the Red Army came over from the east. The concentration camp in Auschwitz was freed, I think, the 27th of January, and then everything got worse and worse for the German army, and at least in Scandinavia we celebrate the Peace Day as the 8th, 9th, 10th of May. But the US still had war going on in the Far East, so this is the 14th of August 1945 when the Japanese emperor had declared his surrender. That we know the date. We know that it's a square in New York. It slips my mind. A specific place in New York. But we know that it was published in the American magazine Life in the ending of August, under a header saying the men of war kissing from coast to coast, or something like that, in a big expose of people kissing and celebrating peace. But for a long time it was not known who these people are. And a plenitude of people have stepped forward and said, oh, this is exactly where I was. This is my feelings of Peace Day. I was there and we were kissing. It was a lovely, lovely kiss. I held her close to me, and when I felt like she was going to pass out from lack of air, I let go of her. Says a New York policeman who claims that that's him and his to-be wife. But when someone looked into this, a more plausible history gives maybe kind of another perspective on this event. The guy is a Marine. He was in the Pacific War and saw hell there, basically. He was on leave during summer. He was on a date with a woman who was to be his wife, though they didn't know that then. They went to a cinema show at the Rockefeller Center, and during the show they heard knockings on the door. The show was interrupted, the lights were turned on, and they opened the door and people were outside screaming, peace is here and now it's over. And they did what I suppose most of us would do. They went out on the street to celebrate with everybody, and they went into a bar and drinks were drunk. And then they went out towards Times Square. This is Times Square. And all of a sudden this guy saw a woman whom he he thought that it was a nurse. This is how he tells the story afterwards. I thought it was a nurse, and I was so overwhelmed with great thankfulness over what the nurses had done in the Pacific. So I just wanted to celebrate and give her a kiss. Wow. So the woman in the back, just behind his shoulder, you see a face? Yeah. That's the woman he's going to marry. And she says when she looks at this image that I was there also, grinning like a mutt. So that's her on the right side. But they didn't see this image until in the mid-60s something. So they were unaware of the image becoming an iconic picture of the peace day. And the nurse wasn't a nurse, really. She was an unaccompanied refugee child, as we would say today, who came with her sister from Austria to escape repression as early as 1939, I think. She lost her parents in the Holocaust and never went back to Europe. She was working at a dentist's office. What's it called? She was a dental assistant. And she had a lunch break and went out to Times Square. And all of a sudden, this guy just comes over, grabs her, and holds her tight and plants this kiss on her face. And you can see that it's really, he's holding her strongly, but she's not. She's like this, and her thumbs go stiff. It's not like she's enjoying this. So this is how she describes this event like 50 years later. So that this image of a romantic, happy event was something very, very different for one of the central figures on this. They had met when they were in their 90s, something. And this image is, of course, owned by, I think, Getty Image, or the Life magazine photo collection is under Getty. So I'm infringing copyright here, but I think they won't notice that. Another example from Sweden. The Swedish National Library has recently digitized all the Swedish government official reports, Statens offentliga utredningar, that have been published since 1922. And I went a couple of weeks ago to a hack seminar thing at the National Library to hear what has been done with this material as it has been presented openly for anyone to do whatever they like. So the national reports present information that it's tasks given by the government to experts to feed into their political processes. So it's taking on every subject that has been politically interesting during the 20th century. It's everything from kindergartens to infrastructure and trains and spaceships, whatever. And it's been a source over the time for many researchers. But when you get it together like a big, huge mass of text, you can do new stuff with it. So this is an attempt to visualize the interreferencing between these reports. So the bigger dots here are the reports, the canonized reports that everybody refers to, and the smaller ones are maybe not taken that much into account. You can also tie together text according to who were the people involved in this inquiry, which were the industrialists or academics that had a say in something that would be Swedish policymaking. Where did they pick up their examples of good practice in different parts of Sweden, and so on and so on. And the National Library has made this available freely for anyone, and they are eager to see what people are going to do with it. It's an important contribution to the research community, but to anyone, basically, who wants to do this. And I have, of course, not done this, as I am an amateur in anything tech, but it's been made by Peter Krantz, who is now a CAO at the National Library, but also one of the strongest open data evangelists in Sweden. So he has built this himself. Another example is from down under. This is built by Tim Sherratt, who is now at the National Library of Australia. But he worked with this material long before he came there, and he usually presents himself as a web tinkerer, cultural heritage data geek kind of person. He's also a part-time professor. This is a reflection and an answer to what was called the White Australia policy that was dominating in Australia from, I think, 1901 till about sometime in the 60s. And it was explicitly made up to keep Asians out of Australia and welcome more European immigration. One of the things that it did was that you had to, when you applied to enter the country, you had to pass a dictation test in a European language. At first they thought of doing it in English, but then they realized that there are plenty of colored people who speak English actually, so we may get an influx of Black Americans or something, and that wouldn't be what we wanted. So a European language might mean that if you're from Malta, you have to do the dictation test in Dutch. One person reportedly knew many languages, but were tried in Gaelic. So after 909, no one who made this test passed it, which was exactly the idea. But this shows that no matter what the authorities did, there were still a plenitude of people of color on Australian ground. And these are what are called in the project the invisible Australians. So you may want to look into this. It's neatly done. And what Tim Sherratt has done is he has extracted these faces by a face recognition script and put them together to make it easy to browse the faces. And if you click on one of these faces, you get to the document where he has picked up the image. But it's also a very moving way of showing the faces of individuals who were part of Australia, who celebrated the Federation, who fought at Gallipoli, struggled through depression, and were in the Pacific War and still neglected by their country. And a beautiful example of what can be done if the resources are open for anyone to use. So that's what we are working for. And what's left then for the keepers of culture if the stories are to be told by other people? We see our most important task as providing reliable resources, presenting them as open for the citizens to do what they want with, basically. We know that that is not possible with everything, but the institutions I work with have plenty of information and data and imagery and old documents and objects and stuffed animals. And so it's plenty to work with, even if you step away from the stuff that might be more complicated. Complications might be personal integrity stuff, maybe someone who has donated their diary or their love letters to an institution hadn't planned for them to be shared with everybody as easy, at least not immediately. But most of the material is not like that. So we have a heavy load to work with, even if we leave some pieces to the side. So we would hope that when you turn to a cultural heritage institution, you would meet someone as polite and friendly as this guy, ready to pick out for you what you want, and not only this showcase material, but also all the stuff that's behind him, down in the walls of the newspapers and the people providing these, the information for the newspapers that he sent. But sadly, there are some obstacles, and all too often you meet this woman instead. She is holding the key and keeping the gate, and she has a strong sense of responsibility for the material that she's guarding. She maybe wouldn't see herself as a keeper of culture, but as a protector. Or she's not driven by hostility, but she's overly sensitive to the heaviness of the responsibility of being the one in charge of this important task. Yeah?
This is a wonderful picture. What is it in the picture?
In the picture is a woman with a key to Edåsa church outside of Skövde. I don't know her name. She has been documented by the Swedish Board of National Antiquities, the National Heritage Board of Sweden, the organization in charge of caring for churches and monuments and ruins and stuff. But it says only kyrkotant, which is a very odd word in Swedish. Kyrkotant Edåsa kyrka, Skövde. And I feel a bit guilty about showing her as a bad example, but it's a wonderful image, so I'm glad to be able to share. She usually says things like, no, we can't do that, it's illegal. We cannot because of copyright. We cannot because this was donated to us or bought by us under certain given circumstances, and we are not free to just share it with anyone. And that might be true for a tiny fraction of the material, but for most part of it, not. She will also say, we can't do that because it's too expensive, which is sadly true, of course. She will also say, we have to check everything before sharing it with you because it has to be perfect, because my sense of responsibility doesn't allow me to let you see something that might be imperfect. That's what we're working on. She might say, I can't let you do that. And then maybe someone else should instead. So we are trying to change this mindset, this frame of thinking within our institutions, and we are changing. I mean, sometimes it feels like you're getting nowhere, but we are changing things, and we are put up by the Swedish government, so we have to work according to the law, but we're trying our best even to deal with the copyright issues. And we have just signed a treaty with the National Collection Society for Imagery in Sweden, Bildupphovsrätt, that will hopefully open up easier ways for the institutions to share material without researching every image to find out who took this picture and when did he or she die, and have we at last reached the end of the protection time yet. So that's something we are hoping to get further with in a short time. But to change this, we also need your help to convince or evangelize that lady, to push her or to force her to open up more. And I suggest that we all pick our stuff together and meet at the Commons to discuss how we can further deepen our ideas on how to take control over the past and thus control even over the future. And that was what I had to say to you. Questions or, yeah?
One question that doesn't maybe relate to open data, but to open software. I've heard some rumors about electronic archive model or the system that you are trying to implement in Sweden. I don't know if it's excited, but I heard some rumors about it being a closed commercial system. Is that true?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
When authorities, when they restore their kind of registers and so on, they send it to the Riksarkivet. And there have been some talks about the formats and what kind of specifications for that technical system, and that Swedish authorities have chosen a closed system and not an open source system as they have done in England and Australia. So I wonder if you knew something about that.
I don't know. That's the material that is delivered from other authorities to Swedish National Archives today. What I know about that is that they formulate very specified förvaltningsgemensamma specifikationer, FGS. That's a way to standardize how these data are delivered, but I don't know more about it. And it doesn't sound, it sounds horrific if they're going for a closed model, but I can't answer. Sorry. Any more ideas, questions, tips for us how to move forward or critique?
Do you have more pictures? You show wonderful pictures.
Yeah.
Do you have any more of them?
We have a plenitude of pictures, but I'm sad to say that most of these images that I have shown to you are not from Sweden, because they are not openly available and free with free licenses. So that's something that we're also pushing. We have formulated our basic ideas in this little pamphlet. It says guiding principle for working with the digital cultural heritage. I have 3 in English and 3 in Swedish only, but they can be picked up at our website, tisan.se. So we are pushing that, and institutions are, the people working with the material are often very supportive of this idea, whereas their directors are not always into it. They don't understand the new paradigm of information and communication.
Some of the things that you showed us earlier and that you mentioned reminded me of that. Sometimes I feel very frightened that the understanding of history that feels very real and common and obvious, when we talk to people who've really looked into something in detail, they say, oh, that's a misconception, that was propaganda, that's a simplification of the story. It's really much different than the common intuition, or much more complex. And it feels like that pattern is repeated over and over, and you just sort of talk to someone who's really looked at something or looked at something from another perspective. And it's so much different from our intuitions that feel so solid. I'm wondering how to deal with that, like how to get a consistently better perspective or broader perspective on history.
Oh, that's a small question. I'm not sure, but I think what we intuitively, I think the first quote I showed you with the kissing sailor is from a man who probably was at Times Square. He really thinks that he was there, and he has tied this image together with his personal experience and kind of made it true in his mind, and that intuition is not neutral or sprung out from his heart, but it's also fed and supported by other imagery and movies, and this kiss has been reenacted at Times Square each 5 years. So people gather there to make this happen again, and the alliance of whatever commercialists around Times Square support them with white sailor caps and red roses for the ladies. So it's a complex interaction with also fiction and mass media. There's a lot to deal with in that. But I think by sharing more of the basic data, the basic information with people and inviting them to look for themselves and share their true stories, I suppose you could also, we won't know that, but you could also gather a lot of histories from people who were at Times Square. Some of them are still alive, and they might be able to share their memories and impressions of that day. And probably many of them were happy, and some of them were not. Some had waited for another outcome of this war. Some didn't realize until Peace Day how much they had lost. So history is never as clear and clean and simple as we are sometimes told. But that was not really a reply to your question, I'm sorry.
It was a good answer.
Any more ideas? I can tell you that this image is it's also from Australia, and it's from a series of events that were arranged in the early years of the 1930s, and they were called mystery hikes. So the idea was that you took part in a mystery hike and went with unknown people by train to an unknown place, and you hiked, not hard hiking, you see that they have city clothes on, and then you had a picnic and were taken care of by everybody. And I choose this image because they have small megaphones there, see, where they can all took their own little history. And I also wanted an image with both men and women, and I see them as gathered on the commons, discussing important stuff. Probably maybe the same issues as we have. Anything else? No. Okay, we're early.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.